The Navy SEALs had one way out, and it just went up in flames. Stranded in a flooded jungle with enemy patrols closing in, their mission was seconds from turning into a last stand. Then, through the storm, came a Black Hawk piloted by a woman who should never have been there, and she was about to do the impossible. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Settle in, because this rescue will keep you hooked to the very last second. The jungle was alive with the kind of noise that made a man's skin prickle, the constant hum of insects, the distant rumble of surf, and the irregular patter of rain on leaves the size of a man's torso. In the coastal lowlands of Kavala, sound didn't travel far, but when you were deep behind enemy lines, every noise felt amplified. Lieutenant Commander Mark Grinder Vance knelt in the mud, scanning the undergrowth through the faint green haze of his NVGs. His voice came low, steady, and deliberate over the comms. Stitch, take point. Scope, keep eyes left. Tide, give me an update every 2 minutes. Copy, Petty Officer First Class Danny Stitch Alvarez replied, sliding past with a carbine held low and ready. His movements were fluid, trained, a combat specialist who knew how to disappear between shadows and foliage. Ben Scope Maddox shifted position to the left, his rifle's optics sweeping the tree line. He was their best fighter when things got loud, but out here, silence was the currency of survival. At the rear, Troy Tide Bowers crouched with his headset tilted, the small whip antenna on his pack catching droplets. Comms are good so far, boss. Still getting the bird on channel 2. The rain had started as a light mist, enough to beat on gear but not slow them down. Now it was thickening into sheets, cutting visibility. Vance knew weather in Kavala had a bad habit of flipping from nuisance to danger in minutes. Eyes open, he murmured, raising a clenched fist to halt the team. Through a gap in the foliage ahead, a low structure sat in a clearing, corrugated metal roof, armed sentries at the corners. The kind of place where men like Victor Drajan stored crates of rifles or surface-to-air missiles. Stitch dropped to one knee, glassing the target through a compact monocular. 2 guards outside. Can't see inside. Could be empty, or full of trouble. Vance checked his watch, doing quick mental math. They were ahead of schedule, but the storm was rolling in faster than forecast. That meant their window for clean recon and clean extraction was shrinking. The radio crackled softly in Tide's ear. He cupped a hand over the mic. Bird says enemy movement near LZ. They're holding position until we confirm it's clear. Vance's jaw tightened. Holding position meant trouble. In this kind of terrain, trouble moved fast. Scope leaned close enough for a whisper. Think Drajan knows we're here? Not yet, Vance said. But I don't like the timing. He pointed 2 fingers forward, signaling Stitch to move again. The team began a slow arc around the clearing, staying in cover. Every step squelched in the sodden ground. Wet leaves brushed their faces. Somewhere to the east, thunder rolled low and mean. The sky above the canopy was darkening by the minute, light bleeding out of the afternoon like someone pulling a shade. They paused again when Scope raised a hand. Movement, 1 o'clock. Through the green glow of his NVGs, Vance saw it too, figures moving through the trees. Not the lazy patrol pace he expected, but a quick, purposeful advance. Their uniforms were mismatched, but their weapons were modern, Drajan's men. How many? Vance asked. 6, maybe more behind them, Scope said. They're heading toward our route to the LZ. That was enough to change the plan. Vance keyed his mic. Tide, tell the bird to stand by. We're adjusting. Copy, Tide said, relaying the message in clipped bursts. Vance waved the team into a tighter formation and pulled them into the lee of a thick banyan tree, rainwater dripping from its tangled roots. We can't move to the LZ without running into them. We'll skirt west and keep our eyes open for a secondary path. The wind picked up, carrying with it the tang of salt from the coast. The storm was moving inland faster now, rain coming at a slant, making the jungle seem to sway. Somewhere far off, a branch snapped under weight. Could be more coming, Stitch said quietly. Vance didn't answer. His focus was on the mental map in his head, the one they'd built from satellite images before insertion. The westward route was slower, but it kept them out of the patrol's direct path. It also put them closer to higher ground, which could help if the rains turned into a flood. "Let's move," he said finally. They threaded through ferns and over slippery roots, every man watching his arcs. Tide's radio hissed intermittently, rain interfering with the signal. 10 minutes in, Scope stopped again. "Contact, rear," he whispered. Vance turned, scanning through the gloom. More movement, closer now, the glint of a rifle barrel through the leaves. Drajan's men were pushing harder than expected, and they weren't alone. The sound of low, terse voices carried on the wind. Vance tapped his mic twice, silent signal to pick up the pace. The SEALs moved quickly but deliberately, careful not to give away their position with noise. They reached a shallow depression in the ground, half filled with muddy water. Vance dropped to a knee, pulling a small map from a waterproof sleeve. "If we push another 2 clicks west, we can loop back toward the strip," he said, mostly for Tide's benefit so he could relay it if needed. Before Tide could respond, the radio came alive, the voice of the extraction pilot, calm but urgent. "Reaper 1 to Grinder, be advised, enemy vehicles moving toward your original LZ. We're holding just offshore. Visibility is dropping." "Say again, visibility is dropping." Vance clicked twice in acknowledgement, eyes narrowing. He knew the clock was ticking faster now. "Stitch, take point again. Scope, rear guard. Tide, keep that line open as long as you can. We move until we find high ground and a clean line of sight." The rain hammered harder, soaking them to the bone. Lightning flashed, white against the green world, followed by a boom that seemed to shake the ground. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp and agitated. Vance tightened his grip on his rifle and pushed forward. The mission wasn't over, but the storm, and Drajan's men, were closing in. The rain was falling so hard now it felt like the jungle itself was closing in. Water streamed off the wide leaves, pooling in the mud and swallowing every step in a wet squelch. Vance signaled a halt and raised a hand to his ear. Through the static in Tide's headset came a voice they'd been waiting for. "Reaper 1 inbound. 2 mics out." Finally. The exfil bird. Vance's eyes swept the canopy. "Copy, Reaper. LZ still hot. Approach low from the east and keep it tight." The team crouched low under the banyon's heavy roots, watching the strip of sky between the treetops. The chop of rotor blades began faint, almost lost in the storm, then built into a pounding thump-thump-thump that they could feel in their chests. "Visual on the bird," Scope murmured, wiping rain from his optics. Through the sheets of water, the Black Hawk's dark shape appeared, nose dipped slightly, navigation lights blinking red and green in the gloom. It was coming in steady, confident, the kind of approach that said the crew had done this 100 times before. Vance keyed his mic. "Reaper, eyes left. You've got." The words died in his throat as a streak of fire arced up from the tree line. "An RPG. Break, break, break," he barked. The Black Hawk jinked hard, but the warhead found its mark, a flash, a puff of black smoke, and the bird lurched violently. One rotor blade sheared, sending shards into the air like shrapnel. The helicopter began to spin, tail swinging wildly. "Impact in the trees." Stitch called out, his voice tight. They could see it now, the bird vanishing behind the jungle canopy, followed by a gut-deep thud and the sound of splintering wood. A brief, ugly silence hung over the team, broken only by the hiss of the storm. Vance's jaw clenched. That crash site was at least half a click away, maybe more. Too far, too exposed, and Drajan's men would be swarming it already. Charging toward it would be suicide. Tide's voice cut in. "Boss, I'm picking up Drajan chatter. They're calling in more troops to the LZ." Vance swore under his breath. "We're not getting out that way. Shift deeper into the jungle, north and west. Move." No one argued. They fell into formation, vanishing into the dripping green. The terrain was turning ugly, streams overflowing, water sluicing down embankments, roots slick enough to send a man sprawling. As they pushed deeper, Vance kept glancing back. In the flashes of lightning, he could see the faint orange flicker of fire where the Black Hawk had gone down. He knew there'd be no survivors if the fire reached the fuel tanks. The storm made the jungle feel even tighter. Every sound was muffled under the rain, but Vance knew the enemy could be just as close, moving fast, using the same cover. They reached a ridge that offered some concealment under a thick mat of vines. Vance dropped to one knee and pulled out his waterproof map. He didn't like the options. Flooding was already cutting off several of the narrow routes back toward the coast. "Tide," he said, "get me a channel to command. Let them know exfil birds down, LZ compromised, and we're moving to concealment." Tide adjusted his headset, working the dial. "Signal's spotty, but I'll get it through." Vance scanned the men, Stitch alert at the front, Scope watching their rear, both soaked to the bone. "We're in for a long walk, boys. Stay sharp." Back at the forward operations base. In the dimly lit command tent, the rain hammered against the canvas roof. A map of Kavala's southern coast lay spread across the central table, its edges curling from the humidity. A cluster of officers stood around it, radios crackling with overlapping chatter. They'd lost direct comms with Reaper 1 the moment it went down. The SEAL team's signal was intermittent at best. At the far end of the table, Major Dana Prescott stood with arms folded, watching a junior officer trace possible extraction routes with a grease pencil. Her flight suit was still zipped to the collar, helmet resting on the table beside her. "They can't go back to the primary LZ," one of the ops officers said. "Drajan's men are all over it." "And the secondary?" another asked. "Flooded. Last drone pass showed standing water up to the skids." Prescott stepped forward, eyes scanning the contour lines on the map. "What about here?" She tapped a small rectangle barely visible between two ridgelines. The officer squinted. "That's a private agricultural strip. Half of it washed out during last year's floods. Too dangerous for a standard landing." "Standard, maybe," Prescott said evenly. "But it's closer to their last known position than any other usable terrain. And it's on high ground, less likely to be underwater." One of the captains shook his head. "Even if it's usable, we've got wind shear warnings for that valley. Not to mention the storm cell sitting over it right now." Prescott kept her eyes on the map. She'd flown into worse, much worse. During a humanitarian mission in the northern provinces 2 years ago, she'd put a Black Hawk down on a mountain slope barely wider than her rotor span. This strip was ugly, but she knew it was possible. "They're running out of options," she said quietly. "And we're running out of time." Back in the jungle. The SEAL team pushed onward, climbing over a moss-covered log slick with rain. Vance could hear the fatigue in their breathing, but no one complained. Every man there knew Drajan's forces would be tightening the net. "Boss," Tide called softly, "command confirms they're working new options. No ETA." "Roger that," Vance said, scanning the path ahead. "Until then, we keep moving." A gust of wind bent the treetops, shaking loose a fresh cascade of water. The thunder was closer now, rolling in sharp bursts that rattled the ground under their boots. Somewhere behind them, a burst of automatic fire cracked through the rain, distant, but not distant enough. Scope glanced over his shoulder. "Sounds like they're closing." "They are," Vance replied. He didn't have to say what they were all thinking. The storm was an enemy too, and it was hitting just as hard as Drajan's men. The team moved deeper into the shadows of the jungle, every sense on edge, waiting for the next move, theirs or the enemy's. The operations room was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and tension. Rain hammered the tin roof above, each strike echoing the urgency that already pulsed through the space. Major Dana Prescott leaned over the map spread across the central table, her index finger tracing a valley she knew better than most. "Negative on fixed wing. Negative on rotorcraft from Bravo Squadron," a communications officer reported, pulling off his headset. "Weather's grounded them all." Prescott straightened, jaw tight. The storm outside wasn't just bad, it was punishing. Flying through it would require more than courage. It demanded familiarity with the terrain, instinctive handling, and a tolerance for conditions that made most pilots turn back. The colonel's voice cut through the chatter. "We can't risk sending anyone. We wait until the weather breaks." "Sir," Prescott said, stepping forward, "there's no waiting. Vance's team is boxed in, flooded escape routes, Drajan's men in pursuit. The only usable strip near them is here." She tapped the worn map, landing squarely on a barely visible airstrip. "I've been in that valley before. Disaster relief. Monsoon season. I can put a bird down there." "You're grounded like the rest," the colonel replied flatly. Her voice didn't rise, but every word carried weight. "With respect, sir, you don't have another pilot who's flown that approach blind in a storm." "I'm not suggesting, I'm volunteering." Silence followed. Radios crackled. Someone cleared their throat. Prescott held the colonel's gaze, waiting for the pushback she knew was coming. "You know the risk?" he asked finally. "I've lived it," she said simply. 5 minutes later, the decision was made. The UH-60 Black Hawk sat on the wet tarmac like a crouched predator, its matte black skin gleaming under sheets of rain. Prescott climbed aboard, giving her co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Blake Rivas, a curt nod. "We keep it low, we keep it quiet, and we get them out." "You sure this crate will hold in the soup?" Rivas asked over the headset. Prescott smirked. "She'll hold if we do." Behind them, 2 crew chiefs checked their gear, fast ropes, litters, and enough ammunition to buy precious seconds if the landing went hot. This wasn't a rescue they could afford to take slow. Deep in the jungle, Drajan's scouts had been listening. A faint thrum reached their ears long before the aircraft could be seen. One crouched low in the wet grass, eyes narrowing as he caught sight of a dark silhouette sliding between breaks in the storm. "Americans," he muttered in his native tongue, spitting into the mud. Another scout, older and sharper, traced a line on his mental map. He knew the valley Prescott was aiming for. It was the only clearing wide enough to take a helicopter in this part of the flooded jungle. And it was perfect for an ambush. The scouts moved quickly, signaling with curt hand gestures. One slipped away to relay the news to Drajan, while the rest began their work. They dragged fallen branches into the narrow dirt road that fed the airstrip, not to block the Black Hawk. Prescott wouldn't be using that route, but to slow any foot movement away from the LZ. Claymore mines were set into the mud, their detonators wired and hidden under leaves slick with rain. A fallen fuel drum was rolled into the brush, its contents siphoned into glass bottles with rag fuses, poor man's firebombs, but lethal against rotorcraft. By the time they finished, the airstrip had become a trap disguised as neglect. To the untrained eye, it would look like nothing more than a jungle clearing battered by the storm. But to anyone caught in it, escape would be narrow, if possible at all. Back in the cockpit, Prescott adjusted her heading, eyes darting between the instruments and the ghostly shadows of the valley ahead. "We'll hit the LZ in 12 minutes. Keep your eyes peeled, Drajan's people aren't stupid." Rivas scanned the darkness, one hand on the cyclic, the other ready on the weapons controls. "Yeah, but they've never had you dropping on them." Prescott didn't reply. She couldn't shake the feeling that Drajan's men would be expecting her. And in this kind of weather, you only got one approach, miss it, and you didn't get a second chance. As the Black Hawk dipped lower, lightning lit the valley in sharp relief, revealing the thin ribbon of the washed-out strip. It looked calm. Deceptively calm. Too calm. The storm had turned the sky into a wall of gray steel. Rain drummed on the Black Hawk's canopy like 1,000 tiny hammers, each one threatening to drown out the sound of the instruments. Prescott sat forward in her seat, eyes flicking between the gauges and the dim, shifting outline of the terrain below. The UH-60's nose dipped slightly as she adjusted her altitude, pushing the helicopter lower, just above the treetops. "Radar's blind in this soup," her co-pilot, Warrant Officer Rivas, muttered. His voice was calm, but she caught the subtle tightening in his jaw. "That's the point," Prescott said. "If we stay low enough, we stay off their screens. Eyes open, terrain only." They sliced through the fog in sheets of rain, the skids occasionally skimming the tops of trees. Each time they cleared a ridge, Prescott expected the valley to appear, but the storm had swallowed the world whole. Then, as if the sky itself struck a match, a flash of lightning ripped across the horizon. For a brief, brilliant instant, the world lit up, jagged mountains, the glistening silver ribbon of the river, and far off, a convoy of trucks grinding their way along a dirt road toward the airstrip. "Contact, 11 o'clock. Rivas called out, already leaning to get a better look. Prescott's gut tightened. Dražen's boys. And they're moving fast. She knew what that meant. The narrow landing window just got even narrower. Another flash. This time, she saw more than trucks. Shapes moved along the ridgelines, men carrying long-barreled rifles, their silhouettes stark against the lightning. Scouts. Spotters. "Looks like they're rolling out the welcome mat," the crew chief said from the back, his voice dry but edged with tension. The Black Hawk pushed forward, blades chopping through the thick, wet air. Prescott kept her speed just under maximum safe limits. Any faster and the rotor wash combined with the rain would risk losing visual reference altogether. At the next bend in the valley, the first shots came. They were faint at first, a few pops lost in the roar of the engines, but then sharper cracks echoed as muzzle flashes bloomed in the darkness. "Small arms, right side." Rivas's voice rose over the comms. "Copy." "Hold steady," Prescott said, banking slightly left to make their profile smaller to the shooters. The fuselage shuddered as rounds smacked into the armor plating beneath their feet. Nothing vital hit, yet. Tracer rounds zipped past the canopy, burning bright red streaks into the night. The crew chief swung the door gun toward the ridgeline, sending bursts of return fire. The rattle of the M240 mingled with the thump of the rain, creating a rhythm that kept Prescott's senses razor sharp. She forced herself to focus forward. In conditions like these, losing focus for even a second could end it. The terrain dipped suddenly, and the ground seemed to drop away beneath them. Prescott eased back on the cyclic, leveling them out just above the river that cut through the valley floor. "LZ in sight," Rivas said after another minute, his voice tense. Through the blur of rain and mist, Prescott saw the faint outline of the airstrip. The strip itself was barely more than a scar in the jungle, bordered by tall grass and sagging fences. Her eyes scanned quickly, and then she saw the problem. Half the runway was a lake. The downpour had turned the far end into a brown, churning swamp. The middle section wasn't much better, pools of water shimmered under the lightning's glare. Only one narrow stretch near the treeline looked solid enough for the skids to kiss without sinking. "That's about 20 feet wide," Rivas said grimly. "Margin for error's 0. "Then we won't make any errors," Prescott replied. Her voice was calm, but her mind was locked in on the approach. They were still taking fire. A round pinged off the doorframe near the crew chief, sending a spark into the darkness. More muzzle flashes flared at the far end of the strip. Dražen's men had made it there ahead of them. Suppressing fire, the crew chief barked, laying into the attackers with another burst. The Black Hawk descended, nose slightly raised. Prescott flared gently, bleeding off speed while keeping just enough forward momentum to clear the wet patches. Rain hammered the canopy so hard she had to rely more on muscle memory than visibility. A gust hit them from the side, sudden, violent. The tail swung right, and Prescott's hands reacted instinctively, correcting the yaw before the skids could drift off target. Rivas's hand hovered over the controls, but he didn't touch them. He trusted her to bring it in. 10 feet, 5, Rivas called. The skids met the strip with a sharp jolt, the rotor wash blasting water and debris into a swirling halo around them. For a moment, the helicopter seemed to skate on the slick surface, but Prescott held it firm, nudging the cyclic until the machine settled. "Set down," the crew chief confirmed, already scanning the tree line for movement. Prescott kept her left hand tight on the collective, eyes darting between the instruments and the strip ahead. Every instinct screamed to get moving. The longer they stayed, the more chance Dražen's men had to close the distance. But for now, she had landed. Against weather, against fire, against every obstacle the valley threw at her, the Black Hawk sat steady, rotors roaring in defiance against the storm. The rotor wash churned rain into blinding sheets, turning the landing zone into a shimmering haze. Prescott kept one hand tight on the collective, the other wrapped around the cyclic, eyes darting between the instruments and the thin ribbon of mud and asphalt beneath them. The instant her skids kissed down, she heard Scope's voice over the comms. Package in sight. Moving. Through the downpour, dark shapes broke from the tree line, the seals, sprinting low and fast. Mud splashed high with every stride, rifles clutched tight against their chests. Prescott could see the effort in their movements even at this distance, the way exhaustion fought every step. Then the jungle erupted. From deep inside the dense green wall, Drajan's men unleashed a wall of sound, the tearing, metallic roar of machine guns chewing through the air. Muzzle flashes flared in rapid bursts, each one briefly lighting up the rain-soaked foliage. The sharp ping of rounds striking metal rattled the fuselage. Contact. Jungle left. Tide's voice was sharp, cutting through the chaos. Multiple shooters, 30 meters. Scope dropped to a knee mid-sprint, returning fire in short, deliberate bursts that cracked against the night. Stitch pivoted toward the threat, his M249 barking a steady stream of suppressive fire, the belt of ammo rattling with every movement. The sound was deafening, mingling with the hammering of rain on the chopper's skin. Inside the cabin, Rivas twisted in his seat, keeping his own rifle up and scanning for threats. "We've got more moving right. At least 5. Copy." Prescott called, jaw clenched. She kept one eye on the incoming seals, the other on her instruments. She couldn't lift until Vance had every last man aboard, but every second here felt like borrowed time. Vance was in the open now, low to the ground, waving the last pair of seals forward. Bullets sliced through the air above him, snapping branches and throwing bursts of mud skyward. "Move, move, move," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the gunfire and the constant thunder of the rotors. Scope's rifle barked again. One of Drajan's men crumpled into the undergrowth. Tide shifted position, kneeling behind a half-submerged log, calling out targets with precision. One by the fallen palm, another by the boulder. Prescott's fingers tightened on the controls. A burst of rounds struck the nose of the chopper, sending vibrations through her boots. She fought the instinct to pull power and lift early. Leaving without the full team wasn't an option. Stitch swung the M249 in a wide arc, spitting tracers into the tree line. "Go! I've got you covered," he yelled, his voice a growl even over the headset. Each burst brought the seals a few more feet toward safety. Vance was the last to break cover, his boots splashing through ankle-deep water as he bounded toward the helicopter. The moment his hand caught the cabin frame, he shoved the final operator inside and followed in one fluid motion. "All in." Vance barked. Prescott didn't hesitate. She slammed the collective upward, and the Black Hawk surged, rotors clawing against the heavy air. The skids lifted free from the mud, the ground dropping away beneath them. Tracer fire lanced through the rain, streaking past the cockpit like burning comets. One whipped so close it painted a line of orange light across Prescott's peripheral vision. She banked hard to the right, feeling the tail boom shudder under the sudden maneuver. "Clear left." Rivas called. "Clear right." Scope's voice answered almost at the same time, though the rattle of distant gunfire chased their ascent. The tree line rushed toward them, dark, tangled, and far too close. Prescott kept the nose low, coaxing every ounce of power from the engines without redlining. The Black Hawk surged forward, skimming the canopy tops. A final volley of tracer rounds stitched the air just behind the tail rotor, but then they were over. The Black Hawk punched through the rain-heavy air, rotors straining under the push. The cabin smelled of wet jungle, gunpowder, and sweat. Prescott's hands clamped the cyclic and collective like they were part of her body, her eyes sweeping instruments in the darkness beyond the canopy. The red hydraulic warning light pulsed to life, followed by a sharp tone that sliced through the cabin noise. Her stomach sank. Hydraulic pressure low. Rotor assembly damage. "Talk to me, Rivas," she called, voice tight. Port side rotor assembly took a hit. "We're losing fluid fast," Rivas shouted over the noise, leaning forward to scan the gauge cluster. "You keep pushing like this, we could seize the system before we get home." Prescott's jaw set. "If I slow down, we're a floating target." Vance, crouched beside the doorway, caught her eye. "Do what you gotta do, Captain. Just get us out of their reach." The rain streaked harder against the windscreen, wipers squealing in a desperate rhythm. The team braced against the cabin's rattling frame. Stitch worked on reloading, his movements quick but methodical. Tide kept his headset pressed tight, feeding position updates from their Overwatch drone to Scope. Scope, still breathing heavy from the fight, kept his rifle trained toward the tree line slipping away below them, just in case. Prescott eased the collective forward, feeling the controls fight back. The chopper vibrated in uneven pulses, every shudder a reminder that the damaged rotor could give out without warning. "You've got a 10-minute window before the hydraulics bleed dry," Rivas warned. "After that, we're flying on prayer." "That's 9 minutes more than I need," Prescott said. Lightning flashed in the distance, briefly lighting up Drajan's Ridge, a black silhouette against a jagged skyline. For a heartbeat, Prescott swore she saw movement there. Watching. Waiting. Approaching River Bend, Tide announced, checking their GPS overlay. "Once we're past that, we've got open field straight to the base." Prescott gritted her teeth. The stick felt heavier now, unresponsive at the edges. She adjusted, making micro-corrections, each one costing her more strength. "Hydraulics are almost bottoming out," Rivas said, his voice tense. "Copy." "Strap in," Prescott ordered. The tree line ahead gave way to the first glint of the base lights, faint in the curtain of rain, but there. "Home." Vance keyed his mic. "Tower, this is Falcon 1-1 inbound, declaring mechanical emergency, requesting immediate clearance to priority landing." "Falcon 1-1, you're clear for runway 2. Emergency crews are rolling," the tower replied. Prescott exhaled through her nose. "All right, everyone, here we go. It's gonna be rough." The Black Hawk descended fast, nose slightly down to maintain speed without overloading the failing rotor. The rain on the canopy blurred the lights into streaks, but Prescott kept her line. The bird shuddered again, this time harder. A deep metallic groan vibrated through the deck. "Port rotor housing's coming apart," Rivas yelled. "Hold it together, girl," Prescott muttered, as if the helicopter could hear her. She cut power to the port side just enough to keep it from tearing itself apart, balancing thrust with the starboard assembly. The skids hit the tarmac harder than she'd planned. The left side dipped dangerously before the hydraulic pressure bled completely away, but Prescott fought it, pulling back with every muscle in her arms, keeping the machine from tipping. The Black Hawk skidded several feet, wheels screeching against the wet runway, before grinding to a jerky, uneven halt. For a second, there was only the ticking of cooling metal and the hiss of rain on the fuselage. Then Vance stepped down the ramp, boots hitting the slick tarmac. He turned back toward the cockpit, water dripping from his helmet brim. His eyes locked with Prescott's. "You didn't just pull us out," he said, voice steady despite the chaos they'd just survived. "You brought us home." Prescott allowed herself a thin smile, small, but enough. Wasn't about to leave anyone out there. One by one, the SEALs disembarked, moving toward the waiting emergency crews. Stitch gave her a nod. Tide offered a quiet, hell of a landing. Scope just raised 2 fingers in salute before disappearing into the shadows of the hangar. The mission was over. The men were safe. Prescott walked toward the hangar lights, boots splashing in the rain. For the first time since lifting off, she let go of the controls, and the weight she'd been carrying. She'd flown through hell. And brought them home. What did you think of Prescott's daring flight and the team's fight to make it home? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share so more people can join us for the next adventure.